not buying it, not till the bulldozer hits the building. And I'm afraid this time that's the deal.
I'm Rebecca Shear, and I hope you can join us this afternoon at 1 here on WAMU 88.5.
Coming up in just about half an hour on today's Diane Rehm Show, it's the Friday News Roundup. That's from 10 to noon. Then at noon on the Politics Hour, D.C. Council member and mayoral candidate Tommy Wells is in studio. The Politics Hour today at noon here on WAMU 88.5. It's 9:30.
Good morning, I'm Renee Montaigne, hoping you're not thinking of calling your newest creation in the kitchen a cronut with a C, because that has already been taken. The trademark was officially registered this week to describe that cross between a croissant and donut that's lured New Yorkers into long lines for months now. The trademark does not affect pastry chefs selling croissants, crow doughs, cronut rollers, and cray nuts, all of which, by the way, really exist. It's Morning Edition.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Dave Mattingly. Later this morning, President Obama outlines changes he'd like to see in U.S. surveillance programs. The president will do so in a speech at the Justice Department. NPR's Tom Gelton reports the president is expected to back some of the recommendations from a review panel he appointed to consider how the National Security Agency does its work.
The single most controversial aspect of the NSA surveillance activity is the agency's bulk collection of Americans' telephone records, not the contents of their calls, but the numbers dialed and the duration of the calls. The Presidential Review Panel recommended that those records currently being held by the NSA be held instead outside the government. Sources tell NPR the president is likely to back that recommendation. The NSA could still search that telephone database for clues into possible terrorist communication, but only with a judicial finding. The president's reform proposals come after extensive consultation with intelligence officials, privacy advocates, and executives of U.S. technology firms. Tom Gelton, NPR News, Washington.
Congress has approved a $1 trillion budget. It funds the government through September and eases some of the automatic budget cuts known as the sequester. Senate passage came a day after the House gave its approval. In London today, Labour leader Ed Miliband is calling for the shrinking of some of Britain's largest banks. NPR's Ari Shapiro reports it's partly a political speech in the run-up to next year's elections.
Ed Miliband says if voters give the Labour Party control of the government next year, he'll force the UK's 5 biggest banks to sell off hundreds of branches.
And we're not asking either whether existing banks should divest themselves of branches. It's about how we make it happen.
He would then impose a new cap on the market share any bank could hold. The U.S. already has such a cap. But bankers in the U.K. warn that this move could be vulnerable to legal challenges. And Conservative Party leaders say forcing banks to sell branches is not the best way to encourage competition. Ari Shapiro, NPR News, London.
Housing construction slowed in the U.S. in December. The Commerce Department says builders broke ground on nearly 10% fewer homes than in the previous month. Single-family home construction was down. Apartment building was off almost 15%. Chief Economist Scott Brown at Raymond James & Associates says some people who were looking to buy a home last year may be rethinking that now.
I think the big concern going forward is the pace of long-term interest rates, the increase in mortgage rates, the rise in home prices have reduced affordability to some extent.
For all of last year, home construction was up 18% as compared to 2012. This is NPR News from Washington.
Support for NPR comes from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, helping people build measurably better lives. On the web at hewlett.org.
This is Morning Edition on WAMU 88.5. Good morning, I'm Matt McCleskey. It's 35 degrees in Northwest Washington at 9:34. And it's time to get the latest look at our Friday morning traffic from Dave Solomon. Good morning, Dave.
Morning, Matt. Southbound 270 delays start at 124 up to 370, continuing to Montrose Road up to the 270 spur. Envelope of the Beltway is slow Old Georgetown Road to the Claire Barton Parkway, also between University Boulevard and Georgia Avenue. Westbound 66 slows Glebe Road to Sycamore Street. Northbound Route 1, heavy volume between 395 and Main Avenue Southwest. Southbound Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast slows down Southeast Freeway heading up to Sousa Bridge. I'm Dave Solomon.
Thanks, Dave. And just ahead, we'll get a look at our Friday forecast and weekend weather. First, in the news, police in Maryland's Prince George's County are looking for the person responsible for killing a pedestrian during a hit-and-run incident early this morning. Armando Truhl reports from College Park.
I'm at the intersection of Baltimore Avenue and Knox Road. This is the heart of the University of Maryland at College Park campus. This is where students come to party. There are restaurants here, bars, all types of establishments. It's also the scene of a fatal hit-and-run crash. I'm here with Officer Harry Bond of the Prince George's County Police Department. What can you tell us, officer?
Well, shortly before 2 a.m., our officers responded to Baltimore Avenue and Knox Road for a fatal pedestrian hit-and-run accident.
What can you tell us about the victim?
The victim was a University of Maryland student.
Was he an adult?
Yes, he was an adult male. He was taken to a hospital where he was pronounced dead.
And in terms of the hit-and-run driver, what are you looking for?
We're looking for a dark blue metallic vehicle with right front end damage.
And as far as the investigation goes, how will that proceed over the coming hours?
We'll canvass the area, pour through video footage of all the businesses in the area. Hopefully we'll be able to get more information on the driver and the vehicle.
Thank you very much, Officer Bond, speaking to us about that fatal hit-and-run here in College Park. I'm Armando Truhl.
There was another pedestrian hit this morning in the district. It happened near the intersection of 13th Street and New York Avenue Northwest when a garbage truck hit a person who was walking. The driver in that incident did remain at the scene, and the pedestrian was taken to a hospital. There are no details on the person's condition. In Virginia, new money collected regionally as part of last year's landmark transportation agreement is starting to flow to local governments. And as Northern Virginia reporter Michael Pope tells us, the first big project might be a new metro station in Alexandria.
The Potomac Yard Metro Station could cost anywhere from $200 million to $460 million, depending on where it's located and what design is selected. City leaders in Alexandria had planned to finance construction of the station by themselves, along with some contributions from developers. But that plan violated the city's debt ceiling and created significant risk. So now city council members are about to submit a wish list to the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority that includes a request for $58 million over the next decade to help finance the project. Alexandria Mayor Bill Ewell.
There's a perception that, Alexandria's needs are far less greater than the rest of the region because they look at us as, quote, already being built out. And so folks are probably scratching heads and saying, well, why do they need so much money?
City leaders say they need the money to help reduce the risk of funding construction of the metro station, which they say will serve the region. For the first 2 years, city leaders are asking for about $1.5 million. That means most of the money will come after 2016. Councilman Tim Levine.
The rat and the python for us is the Potomac Yard Metro Rail Station, and that's something we need to alert the NVTA to, that we're going to be looking for those funds.
Alexandria Vice Mayor Allison Silverberg has a different way of putting it.
It's a huge kahuna financially.
Councilman Justin Wilson says members of the General Assembly who oppose the transportation agreement will be watching Northern Virginia very carefully.
There's going to be a lot of folks in Richmond who are looking for this to fail, and I think we need to show kind of the best set of projects out there to convince the folks in Richmond and the folks around the state this was a good idea.
Council members are set to approve a final list of projects later this month, although the authority will have the final say. Reporting from Alexandria, I'm Michael Pope.
Let's get a look now at today's weather. And with that, here's NBC4 meteorologist Tom Kierine.
Good morning, Matt. Turning colder this weekend and a chance of a little light snow tonight. But for this Friday, we'll just have morning sun giving way to some afternoon clouds with highs in the upper 40s. Then that possibility of light snow around 10 o'clock tonight, ending around dawn Saturday. Perhaps a dusting around the metro area, and maybe a little more up to an inch farther north and west. Partly cloudy, blustery, and cold on Saturday with highs just in the mid-30s. Down to the low 20s Sunday morning. Might have a few flurries Sunday morning, and partly sunny Sunday afternoon with highs around 40. And then for Monday, for Dr. King Day, partly sunny, highs in the upper 40s. And then on Tuesday, turning colder, highs just near 30 with a chance of flurries. I'm News 4 meteorologist Tom Kierine.
Thanks, Tom. It's 33 degrees now in La Plata, Maryland, 30 in Reston, Virginia, and 35 in Northwest D.C. In sports, the Washington Wizards host the Chicago Bulls tonight at the Verizon Center. The Washington Capitals are on the road against the Columbus Blue Jackets. I'm Matt McCleskey, WAMU 88.5 News.
Support for WAMU 88.5 comes from the Hermitage in Northern Virginia, serving seniors ages 62 or better as a fully accredited continuing care retirement community with assisted living apartments. More at hermitage-nova.com.
On the next Metro Connection, Throwbacks. We'll explore how Washingtonians lived, worked, and played in days gone by. And we'll talk with people fighting to keep our region's traditions alive. Join us this afternoon at 1 here on WAMU 88.5.
Coming up in just about 20 minutes on the Diane Rehm Show, it's the Friday News Roundup. We'll look at all the week's top stories from around the nation and around the world with panels of journalists providing analysis. That's the Friday News Roundup from 10 to noon. Then at noon on the Politics Hour, the D.C. Council sparks a new debate over decriminalizing marijuana. Maryland's botched health exchange rollout burns the lieutenant governor and other top officials. And Virginia's new governor faces blowback over a liquor board appointment. That's all on the Politics Hour today at noon here on WAMU 88.5. It's 9:40.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Renee Montagne.
And I'm Steve Inskeep. Good morning. Let's listen to some of a discussion of a question the United States will face for as long as it's a leading nation. It's the question of when to use American military force. The man who advises the president on that question is General Martin Dempsey. He's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And this week he spoke with officers and civilians studying at the National Defense University in Washington. General Dempsey told the students he worries that Americans, including often national leaders, do not fully comprehend what he calls the military instrument and its limitations. NPR's Tom Bowman was in the audience.
The general strolled on stage in the cavernous modern hall. The crowd, a select group, mostly military officers, a sea of uniforms in blue, gray, and green.
Some of you I know got here through the keen competition of the Air Force assignment system. Others through the blind luck of the Navy's assignment system.
Dempsey worked the crowd. He's a West Point graduate who went on to study Irish poetry. He's known for his quick wit, but he also had a serious message. Americans don't know what you do.
We face a deficit that's larger than our budget, and that is a deficit of understanding between those of us who serve in uniform and our fellow citizens.
That disconnect is most glaring when it comes to this. What can the U.S. military achieve in places like Afghanistan, or Iraq, or Syria?
And that's why, in the time remaining to me, I'm going to increase my commitment to have a conversation with our national leaders and the American people about the purpose of the military, not only in times of war, but in peacetime as well.
After the speech, we met with General Dempsey. He swapped his formal uniform jacket for a plain black one. No ribbons or braids, just 4 stars on each shoulder. A cup of coffee was placed next to him, and he picked up on his theme.
One of the things that makes our profession valuable to the nation is that we do have these conversations about what is the proper role of a military leader, what's the proper role of the military instrument of power in and among all the other instruments of national power. I think we have to have that conversation.
But right now, when there's trouble in Syria or Iraq, the conversation turns quickly to that military instrument. Dempsey knows what the military can and cannot do. He was a division commander in Baghdad back in 2003. U.S. leaders expected a quick war. That year, Dempsey spoke about a growing insurgency.
You know, this is not the kind of conflict where we're going to know it's over because somebody walks out of a building with a white flag.
The country descended into hellish sectarian fighting. Dempsey spent 4 years in Iraq, the last 2 training Iraqi forces. Dempsey lost many soldiers in the fight, and to this day, as a reminder, he carries photos of them.
At any given time, I'll have 3, and I have another 130 or so on my desk.
Now, as a top officer in the American military, Dempsey faces pressure over and over to use military force again in places like Syria. More than 130,000 people have died there in the fighting between government forces and rebel groups. Dempsey, along with all the president's top national security advisors, pushed for arming the rebels back in 2012. The White House rejected the idea. Still, Dempsey was skeptical about using the American military. He outlined several options, from airstrikes to no-fly zones, and explained their shortcomings. Last summer, Senator John McCain lashed out at General Dempsey for not supporting a tougher approach in Syria.
Which do you think is a greater cost? The action that we're taking now, which has had no effect on the battlefield equation, or doing nothing?
Senator, I am in favor of building a moderate opposition and supporting it. The question of whether to support it with direct kinetic strikes is a decision for our elected officials, not for the senior military leader of the nation.
It goes back to my concern about your role as chairman of the Joint Chiefs.
I understand.
McCain's argument, if the U.S. had acted more forcefully 2 years ago, the Assad government would be weaker now. Moderate rebels would be gaining ground.